In the book of Exodus, the plagues of Egypt refer to 10 calamities that Yahweh brings upon the Egyptians to compel Pharaoh to free the enslaved Israelites. Each plague challenges Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt, serving as signs and wonders from Yahweh in response to Pharaoh's claim of not knowing him. The Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. These events are also recounted by Jews during the Passover Seder. Modern scholars generally agree that the Torah does not provide a historically accurate account of the Israelites' origins. While a small group of Proto-Israelites may have come from Egypt, it likely did not occur on the large scale described in the Tanakh. Some scholars speculate that the plagues of Egypt could have been inspired by natural phenomena, such as epidemics, though these ideas remain uncertain. The Nile turns to blood. According to the Lord, by this you will know that I am the Lord. With a staff in my hand, I will strike the waters of the Nile, and they will turn to blood. The fish in the river will die, the Nile will stink, and the Egyptians will be unable to drink its water. Exodus 7 verses 17 to 18. The book of Exodus recounts that Aaron struck the Nile with his staff, turning its waters into blood. Pharaoh's magicians replicated the act using their secret arts, adding another layer of blood to the river. Not only the Nile but also stored water in jars and other containers was transformed into blood. As a result, the Egyptians were forced to dig near the riverbank to find uncontaminated water. The plague lasted for 7 days before subsiding. Frogs infest Egypt. This is what the Lord says, "Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse, I will plague your entire land with frogs. The Nile will swarm with them, and they will invade your palace, your bedroom, your bed, the homes of your officials, your people, and even your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will cover you, your people, and your officials." Exodus 8 verses 1 to 4. The book of Exodus describes how God caused frogs to rise from the Nile and spread across Egypt, infesting homes, bedrooms, and kitchens, even Pharaoh's private chambers. Pharaoh's magicians used their secret arts to summon more frogs, intensifying the infestation. For 3 days, frogs filled the land until they died en masse, leaving piles of decaying bodies that filled the air with a terrible stench. Despite the devastation, when Pharaoh was faced with the decision to free the Israelites, God hardened his heart, and Pharaoh refused to release them. Lice infest Egypt. And the Lord said, "Stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the land, so that it may turn into lice throughout all the land of Egypt." Exodus 8 verses 16 to 17. According to Exodus, when Aaron stretched out his hand with the rod and struck the dust, it transformed into lice that infested both people and animals. All the dust across Egypt became swarms of lice, covering the entire land. This marked a new level of suffering for the Egyptians as the plague affected every corner of their lives. Wild animals or flies plague Egypt. The fourth plague brought creatures, variously interpreted as wild animals or swarms of flies, that harmed the Egyptians and their livestock. Exodus explains that the Hebrews were spared from this affliction, as the plague only struck the Egyptians. Pharaoh pleaded with Moses to remove the plague, promising to free the Israelites. However, once the plague ended, Pharaoh reneged on his promise, as his heart had been hardened by God. Mass death of Egyptian livestock. This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, "Let my people go so they may worship me. If you refuse and continue to hold them back, the hand of the Lord will bring a severe plague on your livestock in the fields, on horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats." Exodus 9 verses 1 to 3. In the fifth plague, a devastating pestilence struck Egypt, killing large numbers of livestock, including cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and horses. This plague further weakened Egypt's resources, yet Pharaoh remained obstinate and refused to release the Israelites. Boils afflict Egyptians and their animals. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Take handfuls of soot from a furnace, and have Moses toss it into the air in Pharaoh's presence. It will spread as fine dust over the entire land of Egypt. causing festering boils to break out on both people and animals throughout the land. Exodus 9 verses 8 to 9. In this sixth plague, Moses followed God's command, tossing furnace soot into the air, which spread across Egypt. The result was painful boils erupting on the skin of both humans and animals, adding to the suffering of the Egyptians. This visible and physical affliction was another sign of God's power, yet Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he refused to free the Israelites. Thunderstorm and hail. This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, "Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse, I will unleash the full force of my plagues upon you, your officials, and your people, so that you may know there is no one like me in all the earth. I could have already wiped you off the earth, but I have allowed you to remain to demonstrate my power and proclaim my name throughout the world. Since you still oppose my people, tomorrow I will send the worst hailstorm Egypt has ever seen. Bring your livestock and everything in the fields to safety, for any man or animal left outside will perish under the hail." Exodus 9 verses 13 to 19. The Lord sent a devastating storm of hail, accompanied by thunder and lightning. The storm struck Egypt with such ferocity that it was described as the worst in its history. Hail rained down upon the land, destroying crops, livestock, and property, but the Israelites in Goshen were spared. Despite the destruction, Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he refused to release the Israelites. Locust swarm. This is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, "How long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, so that they may worship me. If you refuse, I will bring locusts into your land tomorrow. They will cover the ground so completely that the land will be unrecognizable. They will consume whatever crops remain after the hail, including every tree in your fields. Your homes, and those of your officials and people, will be filled with locusts, something your ancestors have never witnessed from the time they settled this land." Exodus 10 verses 3 to 6. After Pharaoh's continued refusal, God sent a plague of locusts that swept over Egypt, consuming all vegetation and crops left untouched by the hailstorm. The locusts filled houses and darkened the land, causing widespread devastation. Pharaoh pleaded with Moses to end the plague, but after it ceased, Pharaoh once again hardened his heart and refused to release the Israelites. 3 days of total darkness. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand toward the sky so that darkness will cover Egypt, a darkness so intense it can be felt." When Moses obeyed, a thick darkness enveloped the entire land for 3 days. No one could see or move from their place during this time, but the Israelites had light in their dwellings. Exodus 10 verses 21 to 23. The ninth plague brought an eerie and oppressive darkness over Egypt, symbolizing God's power over creation. This darkness paralyzed the Egyptians, isolating them in their homes, yet it did not affect the Israelites, further emphasizing their separation from the Egyptians in God's plan. Death of every firstborn in Egypt. This is what the Lord says, "At midnight, I will go through Egypt, and every firstborn son will die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn of the slave girl grinding at the mill, and even the firstborn of the cattle. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there ever has been or ever will be again." Exodus 11 verses 4 to 6. Before this final and most devastating plague, God instructed the Israelites to mark their door frames with the blood of a lamb, so the angel of death would pass over their homes, sparing their firstborn. At midnight, death struck every Egyptian household, from the highest-ranking Pharaoh to the lowest servant, leaving Egypt in despair. This final act broke Pharaoh's resistance. Overcome with grief, he ordered the Israelites to leave Egypt immediately, allowing them to take whatever they desired. This event became the foundation of the Passover, commemorating God's protection and the liberation of the Israelites from slavery.